She nearly drowned, until an alpha vampire pulled her from death and into his world. The sea had always been Alara's companion, calm and soothing in its quiet moments. But tonight, it roared like a living creature, hurling waves with a rage that seemed almost personal. The sky had turned black, and jagged lightning split the horizon, illuminating the stormy waters in silver flashes. Rain poured like rivers from the sky, drenching her hair and clothes, chilling her bones. The ship beneath her groaned, a tired beast bucking against the power of the ocean. Alara clung to the railing, her knuckles white, heart hammering. The wind screamed in her ears, drowning out all thoughts except the one that insisted. Survive. She had always been taught that she was strong, that her noble blood carried courage, but nothing had prepared her for the sea's wrath. The waves crashed over the deck, drenching her completely, threatening to sweep her overboard. A massive swell lifted her like a leaf, throwing her from the deck into the icy depths. Water engulfed her senses, dark and suffocating. For a moment the world disappeared into cold and silence, and she sank deeper and deeper into the abyss. Her lungs burned and her arms ached as she struggled to rise, but the ocean seemed endless, unyielding, and merciless. Then a shadow appeared beneath her. She could feel it before she saw it, a strange and powerful presence moving through the water with impossible speed. Hands cold and strong as iron reached for her, gripping her arms and pulling her upward. She gasped, water spilling from her mouth, lungs filling with the sweet taste of air. When her head broke the surface, lightning illuminated the figure holding her. Tall, cloaked with hair as dark as the midnight storm, he had eyes that seemed to pierce her very soul, eyes that were both terrifying and magnetic. His expression was unreadable, but his presence commanded something ancient, something powerful.
"Hold on," he said, his voice low, smooth, like a dark melody.
You will not drown tonight. Alara's mind spun. Who was this man? How could he move through the waves with such strength? And why did she feel, in spite of fear, that she could trust him? Her body, trembling with cold and exhaustion, had no choice but to obey. He carried her with impossible ease, pulling her toward a distant shadow. Something that she realized with confusion and awe was a massive vessel, black and imposing. Once aboard, he laid her down on the deck. Rain streamed around them, soaking her completely, and the storm's fury seemed to grow more violent, as if the sea itself resented her survival. Are you some kind of sailor? She stammered, shivering. He tilted his head slightly, a small hint of amusement touching his face. I am no sailor, and not like any mortal you have known, he said. His voice carried a weight that made her pulse quicken. I saved you because the night had plans for you. Plans I could not allow. Elara struggled to comprehend his words. Burish, the night had plans? Her thoughts flew in every direction, tangled and desperate. How could one person, one creature, save her from death itself? And why had he? He extended a hand, not in comfort, but in command. The command was gentle yet irresistible.
Alara, against her fear, took it. The moment their fingers touched, a strange warmth spread through her, dispelling some of the chill from the storm.
She realized with a shiver that she could not pull away even if she wanted to. Who are you? She asked again, her voice small. Names are less important than survival, he replied.
You are not safe yet, not fully. He turned, eyes scanning the horizon, sharp and alert.
The world above will not forgive weakness, nor will the forces that roam it.
For hours the storm raged around them. Yet aboard this dark vessel, a strange calm seemed to exist. Elara found herself watching him, noticing details she could not explain. The way his movements were precise, effortless, almost inhuman. The shadows seemed to bend toward him, and the wind, though still violent, softened near his presence, as if respecting some invisible authority. "Why me?" she finally whispered. "Breaths. Why save me?" He hesitated. For the first time, she saw a flicker of something in his expression. Regret, perhaps, or sorrow, buried beneath centuries of solitude. "Because I cannot bear to see the innocent crushed by fate when I can intervene,"
he said, voice edged with something deeper, darker, and because your survival
may change everything.
Elara tried to make sense of his words, but fear and exhaustion muddled her mind.
Bess. Still, something in her chest stirred, a tiny spark of hope amid the chaos. She had nearly drowned. She had been at the edge of nothingness, and yet here she was, alive, though carried into a world she could not yet comprehend. The vessel carried them into a dense fog, obscuring the storm's fury. The dark figure led her below deck through corridors that seemed impossibly long and ancient, the walls lined with shadows that moved almost like breathing creatures. Candles flickered with a ghostly light, casting strange patterns across the stone floors. Elara felt as though she had stepped into a dream, or Finally, they reached a chamber, vast and imposing, filled with dark furniture carved with intricate designs, tapestries depicting battles and creatures she could not name, and a large window that looked out over the stormy ocean. The man motioned for her to sit.
She obeyed, though her body still trembled from fear and cold. "You will rest here," he said.
"But do not think this sanctuary guarantees safety."
Many dangers lurk beyond these walls, and some I cannot control.
Dangers beyond these walls? What kind of world had she been pulled into? She wanted to ask more, to demand answers, but exhaustion and the storm's lingering chill left her almost mute. He knelt beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him. "I have saved you from the water, but there are other waters you must navigate now," he said, eyes dark and unyielding. "The currents of this world are treacherous, and the tides are guided by forces you cannot see yet." Beck! She wanted to flee, to run from this strange, imposing man who had saved her life, but she knew it was impossible. Something in him, the power, the mystery, the danger, held her in place as surely as the sea had nearly claimed her. Brace. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the storm's distant roar. Elara found herself staring at him, studying him with growing curiosity and fear. Who was he? What was he? Brace. And why had he chosen her? Finally, she spoke, her voice trembling. "Am I alive because of you? Or because fate had other plans?" He did not answer immediately. Instead, he gazed at the horizon through the window.
Eyes unreadable.
"Perhaps both," he said softly. "Perhaps neither. Some things are not meant to be understood immediately. Some things are felt and endured and survived."
Elara shivered, unsure whether it was from the cold or the weight of his words. She wanted to ask more, but the storm, the shadows, and the strange power he radiated left her unsure of anything.
She realized, with a pang of both fear and fascination, that she was standing on the edge of a world she had never known, a world of darkness and power, where life and death were not as simple as they had seemed. As sleep tugged at her, heavy and reluctant, she heard him speak once more, low and almost reverent. "Rest now, Elara." Shh. "The night is not finished with you yet, and neither am I." And with that, the candlelight flickered, the storm raged on outside, and the shadows seemed to lean closer, waiting, watching. Bear. She closed her eyes, heart pounding, a strange mix of fear and anticipation flooding her senses. For the first time, she understood the truth of the words she had always been taught but never believed, that life could change in an instant, that survival could pull you into a world you had never imagined, and that the choices of others could shape your fate in ways you could not yet see. And somewhere, in the darkness beyond the walls, she felt it, the silent promise of power, danger, and a destiny that would not allow her to remain untouched. The storm had passed, leaving the sea calmer but still restless, as if it remembered the fury it had shown. Elara awoke to silence, the vast chamber still dimly lit by the pale glow of lanterns. Her body ached from the cold water, and her hair clung to her face, dripping onto the stone floor. Bow. For a moment, she remembered the waves, the ocean swallowing her, the terrifying cold of near death. And then she remembered him, Kale, the man who had pulled her from the abyss and carried her into a world she could not yet name. The chamber seemed enormous now that she had rested. Shadows clung to the corners like living things, twisting in shapes that made her pulse quicken. She tried to rise, only to realize that her legs were still weak from the sea and the long hours she had spent clinging to the railing of her ship. She sank back onto the bed, her thoughts tangled between fear and fascination. A soft sound interrupted her reverie. Footsteps, light and deliberate, echoed in the stone corridors. She knew it was him before he appeared. Kale moved with a grace that was almost unnatural, his presence filling the room before his figure emerged from the shadows. His dark eyes met hers, piercing yet unreadable, and she felt that same pull, the inexplicable tension that made her heart race even as she feared him. "You are awake," he said, his voice smooth, calm. "Be good. There are things you must see." Bang.
Elara swallowed, unsure whether to stand or remain seated. Where
are we?" she asked, her voice trembling. "This is my home," he said simply, though the word home carried weight she could not understand. "And it is not safe for outsiders. Yet you are not an outsider anymore. Not entirely. You are part of what comes next." Psst. She studied him, trying to understand his meaning. But the complexity in his eyes, the way he carried himself, made her feel like a child lost in a forest at night. She wanted answers, yet feared the truth. Kao extended a hand. "Come. You must see the world you have entered." Despite her hesitation, she took his hand. The warmth of his grip contrasted sharply with the chill that lingered in her bones, and she felt an odd sense of steadiness she could not explain. Together they left the chamber, moving through corridors that seemed both ancient and alive. Tapestries lined the walls, depicting scenes of battles long past and creatures she had never seen. The shadows moved in ways that seemed deliberate, almost as if they were alive, whispering secrets that she could not yet hear. They arrived at a large hall, vast and echoing, where candles flickered along stone walls. The room smelled of aged wood and something darker, a scent that was difficult to name yet impossible to ignore. Kale gestured to the far end where a long table was set, though no one sat at it. This is where decisions are made, he said, where power is measured, alliances forged, and enemies marked. This is your world? He nodded. And it is dangerous.
You must understand that every step you take here can change your fate or end it.
She shivered, not from the cold, but from the weight of his words. There was power in him, undeniable and almost overwhelming. And yet, beneath that power she sensed something more. Loneliness, sorrow, a history that stretched across centuries.
"Why am I here?" she asked quietly, almost afraid of the answer.
Why did you save me? Kael's gaze lingered on her, his expression unreadable.
Because you were at the edge of death, he said.
And because the night does not always forgive, some lives are meant to continue, even if they are dragged into darkness. Elara wanted to ask more, to demand clarity, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she followed him in silence, her mind racing with questions she had no answers for. Over the next days, Elara began to explore the strange world Kael had pulled her into. She discovered that the castle was alive with secrets. Servants moved silently through shadowed halls, their faces pale and eyes sharp, but they did not speak of Kael unless he permitted it. She saw rooms filled with books, ancient artifacts, and strange symbols that seemed to hum with quiet power.
Every corner of this place hinted at centuries of history, battles, and darkness that she could barely comprehend. Kael watched her closely during her exploration.
He did not speak much, but the intensity of his gaze made her feel both scrutinized and protected. Sometimes, when she thought he was not looking, she caught him studying her, as if measuring her courage, her resolve, or perhaps something deeper. One evening he led her to a terrace that overlooked a sea. The storm had long passed, leaving the water smooth and dark, reflecting the silver light of the moon. Elara leaned on the stone railing, feeling the wind on her face, and for a moment the weight of fear lifted. Do you understand what it means to be part of this world?
Kael asked, standing beside her.
She shook her head.
Not yet, she admitted. I feel pain. Lost and afraid. Desperation. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked out at the horizon, his profile sharp against the moonlight. Bay.
Then he spoke, softer this time. You are not the first to be afraid.
But fear can be shaped into strength if you allow it. You must learn, Elara. Despot, learn quickly. She turned to him, meeting his gaze. And if I fail? Kael's eyes darkened, and for the first time she saw a flicker of something that resembled regret. Failure is not an option, he said. Not while I exist to prevent it. But understand this. Survival here will demand more of you than you have ever imagined. But even then, it may not be enough.
Elara felt a shiver run through her.
There was a strange magnetism to him, a pull she could not resist even as every instinct told her to be wary. She wanted to step back, to distance herself, but something in his presence made that impossible. Days turned into nights, and she began to notice the patterns of this world. The servants moved in silence. The castle shifted as if it were breathing, and Kael's influence stretched through every shadow, every corridor. He was everywhere and nowhere, a presence she could not ignore. One night she found herself unable to sleep, wandering through the corridors. The castle was quiet, the only sound the distant echo of her own footsteps. She reached a window and looked out at the moonlit sea, feeling a strange connection to the night. Frowned. And then she felt it. the sensation of being watched. Kyle appeared beside her, silent, as if he had materialized from the shadows themselves. Beck, the night listens, he said softly. It has plans for you, Elara, and it watches everything you do. She turned to him, startled. Plans for me? Yes, he said, voice low, almost a whisper. The currents that brought you here are not random. Something greater than fate has guided you. But with it comes danger, and you must learn to navigate it or be swept away. Elara felt a mixture of fear and curiosity, and something else she could not name, a strange warmth that spread through her chest. She realized that, despite the danger, she was drawn to him, as if some invisible thread connected them. "Why me?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Why save me when the sea wanted to take me?" Kale's eyes softened slightly, though the darkness in them never fully faded.
Because you have something that cannot be ignored.
Strength, courage, and something in your spirit that called to me even before I knew you existed.
Elara shivered, unsure whether his words were meant to comfort or to warn.
Bed. She felt both protected and trapped, drawn closer to him even as her mind screamed that she should resist.
The days that followed tested her resolve.
Kale taught her to move silently, to sense the subtle shifts of power in the castle, and to understand the whispers of the night that no mortal could hear.
Each lesson was a mixture of fear and fascination, pushing her limits while revealing hidden strengths.
She realized that survival here meant more than physical endurance. It required courage, intelligence, and a willingness to face shadows she had never imagined. Through it all, Kale remained both a guide and a challenge. He pushed her, tested her, and sometimes frightened her with his intensity. And yet, in moments of quiet, she glimpsed the man beneath the predator, a being shaped by centuries of solitude, power, and sorrow. One evening, as they stood on the terrace watching the moonlight ripple across the waves, Kale spoke quietly. "You are changing, Elara. You are no longer the girl who feared the sea. You are becoming something stronger. Someone who can walk between worlds, between shadows and light." Becked.
She looked at him, her chest tightening. "And what about you?" she asked.
"Are you changing too?" Kale's eyes met hers, and for a long moment neither spoke. Then he said, almost reluctantly, "Perhaps. But some changes are more difficult than others. Some require trust, and some require surrender."
Elara's heart raced, caught between fear and fascination. She understood that her survival had pulled her into a world she could never fully comprehend, a world of power, darkness, and unspoken desires.
And she realized, with a mixture of awe and dread, that Kale's presence was both a shield and a challenge, a force that would shape her destiny whether she wished it or not. The cry that had reached them across the waves was not natural. It was raw, desperate, and it carried a warning that made Elara's chest tighten. Kale's eyes narrowed, dark as the midnight sea, and the shadows around him seemed to stir, as if anticipating the danger. "Stay close," Kale murmured, his voice a low command, yet not unkind.
Elara nodded, gripping his hand tightly.
The warmth of his touch was a tether in a world that suddenly felt more dangerous than ever. They moved quickly through the castle's corridors, silent as ghosts. Elara had begun to learn the rhythms of this place, the way the floors whispered underfoot, the subtle changes in the air that marked the presence of another. And yet, nothing she had experienced could prepare her for the figures waiting in the outer courtyard. Oh. He glances around in despair. Cloaked and moving with unnatural precision. Mortals, perhaps, but not ordinary ones. Their eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, and the weapons they carried reflected the silver light of the moon in a way that made Alara's heart race. She could sense that these were hunters of something beyond ordinary men, drawn by the threads of fate that now tied her to Kale. "Do not move," Kale said, stepping forward. His presence radiated authority, and the shadows seemed to gather around him, responding to his will. The intruders hesitated, as though weighing their chances against a predator they did not fully understand. Elara's pulse pounded. She had never seen him like this. Every movement calculated, every sense alert. There was no hesitation, no fear, but only control and power, the kind that made her both tremble and admire him. The leader of the intruders stepped forward, a faint sneer on his lips. "The girl belongs to us," he said. "She is key to the power we seek. Step aside, and you will not be harmed." Kale's response was a slow, deliberate movement. He did not speak. He simply stepped closer, and the shadows seemed to obey him, wrapping around him like a living cloak. The intruders faltered, their confidence waning. "You do not understand what you are facing," Kale said finally, his voice calm but dangerous. "She is not yours to claim." A tense silence followed, broken only by the distant crash of waves against the cliffside. Then the lead intruder drew a blade, its edge glinting with an otherworldly light. Kale's eyes flickered briefly, and in a motion that was both terrifying and precise, he moved. The battle that followed was swift and merciless. Elara watched, frozen between fear and fascination, as Kale's power became undeniable. Shadows bent and swirled around him, striking with precision, forcing the intruders back. Every move he made was perfect, controlled, and yet there was a grace to it that left her breathless. One of the intruders lunged at her, and Elara reacted instinctively, pulling back. But Kale was faster. He intercepted the attack, his hand gripping her shoulder, steadying her. Their eyes met for a brief moment, hers wide with fear, his unreadable yet filled with a strange intensity. "You are safe," he whispered. "For now." The intruders retreated, but not without leaving a warning. "This is not over!" the leader hissed, disappearing into the shadows. "The night has many secrets, and one day she will be ours." Elara's legs shook, and she sank to the ground, overwhelmed by the near-death experience she had narrowly avoided once more. Kale knelt beside her, his hand brushing her hair back from her face. She felt the warmth of him, the steady strength that had saved her repeatedly, and for a moment she allowed herself to relax.
"You are brave," Kale said, his voice softer now, almost a whisper.
"Braver than you realize, and that courage will be your shield in the nights to come." Alara's chest ached, a mixture of relief and something else she could not yet name. She wanted to speak, to express gratitude, but words failed her. Instead, she simply looked at him, aware of the bond that had begun to form between them. Fragile, dangerous, and yet undeniable. For days afterward, the castle was tense. Kale moved through it with a silent authority, his presence a constant reminder that danger lurked beyond their walls. Elara tried to learn, to understand, to prepare herself for whatever might come next. She discovered that the world Kale inhabited was full of secrets. Alliances among vampires, pacts with mortals, and whispers of curses that stretched back centuries. Kale continued his training with her, guiding her through the subtleties of this dark world, She learned to move quietly, to sense danger, and to understand the power that flowed through the shadows. Each lesson was both frightening and exhilarating, pushing her beyond the limits of what she had thought possible. And yet, beneath the lessons there was something more, a tension between them that neither could ignore. Cale's eyes lingered on her when he thought she was not looking, and she felt a pull toward him she could not explain. It was not love, not yet, but it was a connection, raw and undeniable, that made her heart beat faster, even as fear lingered. One evening, as they walked along the terrace overlooking the moonlit sea, Cale stopped and turned to her. "You are changing," he said quietly. "Beth, you are no longer just a mortal caught in the currents. You are becoming part of this world. But with that change comes danger. Danger that cannot be avoided."
Elara looked at him, feeling the weight of his words.
"I want to understand," she said softly. "I want to survive, to be strong."
But I am afraid, KL. Afraid of what I am becoming. Afraid of what might happen to me and to you.
Kyle's gaze softened, and for a moment he allowed himself a vulnerability he rarely showed. "Fear is natural," he said, "but courage is not the absence of fear. It is acting in spite of it. You have courage, Elara, and that is why you are here, alive, and why I will not let you go." The wind carried their words across the terrace, and for a brief moment the world seemed to hold its breath. Elara felt a strange warmth spread through her chest, a mixture of trust, admiration, and something deeper that she did not yet understand. But the peace was short-lived. From the shadows of the terrace, a figure emerged, silent and deliberate. Elara's heart skipped a beat as she recognized the cloak, the weapon glinting faintly in the moonlight.
Another intruder had arrived, braver, faster, and more determined than the last.
Cale's eyes darkened, and he moved to stand in front of her, his posture protective, commanding. "This is your final warning," he said, voice low and dangerous. "Leave now, or face the consequences." The intruder stepped closer, and for a moment, Cale did not move. Then, with a sudden fluid motion, he advanced, shadows swirling around him like a living armor. Elara's pulse raced as she watched, caught between fear and awe, knowing that the danger had returned, and that the night was far from over. She wanted to act, to help, to fight alongside him, but Cale's hand shot out, gripping her arm gently but firmly. "Stay," he commanded. "But your place is here, where you are safe." And in that instant, Elara realized the truth. Her life had changed forever. She was no longer the girl who had nearly drowned. She was part of a world of shadows, power and danger, bound to a man whose strength was both terrifying and magnetic. And as the intruder advanced, she understood that survival would demand more from her than courage alone. It would demand trust, resilience, and the willingness to embrace a darkness she had never imagined. The first light of dawn crept over the horizon, pale and fragile, brushing the castle walls with a cold glow. Elara stood on the terrace, her heart still pounding from the events of the night. The intruders had returned, more numerous and determined than before. She had barely slept, and every shadow seemed alive, whispering of threats still lurking beyond the walls. Cale emerged from the shadows behind her, silent as ever. He had fought with a ferocity that left no doubt about his power, but Elara saw something else in his eyes that morning, an exhaustion that went deeper than the body, a weariness of centuries and battles long past. She knew, without words, that the fight they faced now would demand more than strength. It would demand trust and courage beyond anything she had yet experienced. "You are ready," Kale said quietly, though his tone was more statement than question. His gaze was sharp, studying her as if measuring her resolve. "Do you understand what must be done?" Elara nodded, though her chest ached. "But I think so. But I am afraid." Kale's expression softened for a fleeting moment, the vulnerability he rarely showed slipping through. "Fear is natural," he said, "but courage is acting in spite of fear." "You have already survived what no one else could, Elara. Now, you must face the choice that will define your path." The castle doors opened suddenly, and the intruders, humans with powers they barely understood, poured into the courtyard. Their eyes glowed faintly, reflecting ambition, greed, and malice. Elara stepped back instinctively, but Kale moved forward, shadows twisting around him, a living cloak of power. "You will not take her," he said, voice low, but every word carried weight. "She belongs to the night now, but more importantly, she belongs to her own destiny." "Destiny can be claimed," the leader said, "and power must be seized. She will give it to us willingly or not." Kale's eyes narrowed, and for a moment the air itself seemed to tighten. Then he moved. The shadows surged forward like living creatures, striking with a precision and force that left the intruders struggling to defend themselves. The courtyard became a blur of motion, power, and determination. Elara watched, heart hammering, as Kale fought. Every move he made was calculated, every strike a reflection of centuries of experience. And yet she saw the strain in him, the toll of his power, the weight of centuries of solitude and responsibility. She realized that no matter how strong he was, some battles could not be fought alone. "But I can help," she whispered, stepping forward. Kyle glanced at her, a flicker of surprise in his eyes.
"You must choose," he said firmly, though not harshly, "your life or the fight."
"Both may demand sacrifice." Elara took a deep breath, feeling the wind against her face, the weight of the moment pressing down. She had been tested, shaped, and transformed by the nights she had spent in this castle, learning, surviving, and trusting the man who had saved her. She understood now that courage was more than action. It was also choice, the willingness to face consequences and embrace responsibility. "I choose to stand with you," she said, voice steady. "I will face this, not because I have to, but because I must." Kale's eyes softened, a flicker of warmth breaking through the shadows that usually surrounded him. "Then we face it together," he said. The battle escalated. Elara, guided by Kale's instructions, moved swiftly and deliberately. She dodged, hid, and struck when necessary, surprising herself with the instinctive confidence she had gained. She realized that survival was no longer just about her. It was about the bond they shared, the trust between them, and the strength they drew from one another. The leader of the intruders advanced toward her, his weapon raised. Kale intercepted him, moving like a shadow incarnate, striking with precision and controlled power. Yet even Kale could not fight alone indefinitely. The intruders pressed harder, their numbers seemingly endless, and for a moment it seemed as though the darkness itself might be overrun. Kale's eyes met Elara's, a silent command passing between them. She understood instantly. It was a moment of reckoning, one that would demand everything she had learned. Taking a deep breath, she moved forward, not as a frightened mortal, but as someone who had survived the depths of the sea, the shadows of the castle, and the trials of the night. Together they fought, a rhythm of shadow and movement, instinct and trust. The intruders faltered, unable to overcome the combined strength of Kale's mastery and Elara's courage. The courtyard became still again, the echoes of battle fading into silence. Cale turned to her, chest heaving slightly, his eyes dark and intense. "You have done well," he said quietly. "Braver than anyone I have ever known." Elara's chest rose and fell with effort. I could not have done it alone," she admitted, voice trembling slightly. "I had to trust you, and I think I did." Cale's expression softened, and for the first time the walls around his heart seemed to lower, if only a little.
He reached out, brushing a strand of wet hair from her face, a simple gesture yet heavy with meaning.
"Trust," he murmured. "It is the beginning of everything." For a moment, the storm of fear and danger seemed to vanish. The night, which had threatened to overwhelm them, held its breath. Elara understood that their bond, tested in darkness, strengthened in danger, was no longer fragile. It had become something enduring, forged in trust and courage, and tempered by choice. But the night had one final trial for them.
A whisper of movement reached Elara's senses, subtle and deliberate. Shadows shifted at the edges of the courtyard, revealing the faint outline of a figure she had not seen before.
Hale stiffened, recognizing the presence immediately. "The curse," he whispered, eyes narrowing. "It is not broken yet." Elara's heart sank. They had survived the intruders, proven their courage, and yet a threat remained. A force older, darker, and more dangerous than anything they had faced. Cale's eyes held a flicker of concern, the vulnerability he had tried to hide finally showing. "We can face it," Elara said softly, stepping closer to him. Together. Cale studied her, and in that moment she saw centuries of solitude and pain, of battles fought and lives lost reflected in his gaze. Then he nodded, a silent acceptance passing between them. "Together," he agreed. The figure stepped forward fully, revealing the cursed presence that had haunted Cale for centuries. Its eyes glowed with an unholy light, and its voice was a whisper that seemed to echo through the shadows.
"You cannot escape the night you carry," it said. "The curse binds you both. Only one can survive."
Bo.
Instead, she reached for Cale's hand, gripping it firmly.
"Then we face it side by side," she said. "Whatever comes, we face it together." Cale nodded, the shadows around him swirling with anticipation. He moved forward, and together they confronted the ancient curse. The battle was not physical alone. It was a test of will, courage, and the bond they shared. The shadows twisted, the air crackled with power, and for a moment it seemed as though the night itself had risen to challenge them. Elara felt the surge of energy, the pull of the curse trying to separate them, to drive fear and doubt into her heart. But she held fast, remembering every trial, every lesson, every moment she had survived. She drew strength from Cale, from their shared trust, and from the courage she had discovered within herself. Cale's voice echoed in her mind, steady and strong. "Do not falter. Trust me, and trust yourself. We are stronger together." With that, they moved as one, confronting the darkness not as master and mortal, but as equals, bound by choice and courage. The shadows shrieked, twisted, and finally began to dissipate, retreating from the force of their combined will. When the final tendrils of the curse vanished, silence fell over the courtyard. The first light of dawn warmed the stone walls, and the storm of the night seemed to vanish entirely. Cale turned to Elara, his eyes dark but softened by relief and something warmer. Pride, admiration, and an unspoken connection that had grown deeper than either had anticipated.
You have done it, he said quietly.
You have faced the night and survived, and so have I!
Elara breathed heavily, her chest rising and falling, her body trembling from exhaustion and relief.
We did it, she corrected softly.
Together. Kale's hand found hers again, holding it with a gentleness that contrasted with the power he radiated.
Yes,
He said. Together. The sun rose fully over the horizon, bathing the castle in golden light. The world they had entered, once dark and threatening, seemed at last to promise a future shaped by their courage, trust, and choice. Elara realized that she had changed, that she was no longer the frightened girl pulled from the sea. Thus, she was stronger, braver, and bound to a world, and to a man that had once seemed unreachable.
Kale looked at her, and in his gaze, she saw centuries of loneliness finally beginning to ease. He spoke softly, almost reverently. The night is ours now.
But more importantly, our future is ours to choose.
Elara smiled faintly, feeling the weight of the past nights lift from her shoulders. She had survived the depths, the shadows, and the curse.
She had found courage, trust, and an unspoken bond with a man who had once been a mystery, now a companion, protector, and equal in the challenges to come. And as they stood together, hand in hand, overlooking a world that was still full of shadows but now tempered by light, Elara understood the truth she had discovered in the darkest moments. That survival was not just about avoiding death, but about embracing the power, trust, and love that could emerge even from the deepest night. The storm had passed, the curse was broken, and the night belonged to them. But their journey, bound by courage and choice, had only just begun.